Okay, so let's continue. So we were looking at the German versus the Greece credit default swap spreads, right? So what would have been the strategy at the time, right? They were equal initially, and then we were expecting the German credit default swap spread to go up by a small amount, and the Greece credit default swap spread to go up by a large amount, right? So what would the appropriate, this was what we actually discussed in class, what the appropriate strategy at that time was. It would have been to take a short position in this. Short, that means you sell insurance on this and you take a long position on this. Now, if the two spreads are the same, how much money would it take to get into that spread, into that position, long, short position? Long Greece, short Germany, right? If the two spreads were the same, your net cash outflow would have been zero. So how many positions could you take? You could invest in a large position with a small amount of money, right? Then what happens is, as the spread widens, right? That is, you've bought insurance on Greece debt for a cheap price, right? Now, Greece is on the verge of defaulting on its debt. How much is that insurance worth? Hell of a lot, right? So you took the money short here, you invested it over here. As the difference changed significantly, Greece CDS went up just a little. German credit default swap spreads went up just a little. The Greece credit default swap spread went up significantly, right? And how much money would you have made in this long-short position? A huge amount of money. Okay. Now, a similar trade was conducted in the current environment, just as this COVID-19 crisis by a hedge fund. I won't get into the details of that, but they took a long-short position on the credit default swap spread of these two. Because what happens is, as you get into a crisis, which of these becomes more risky? This becomes more risky. Is that clear? So you take a long position in the HY bonds, a short position in IG bonds, right? As we get into a crisis, HY bonds, the default goes up significantly relative to IG bonds, right? So your long position over here, so over here in the current environment, long, short, that's February. If you did this in February, early February. Long position in HY, short position in IG, right? You'd have to pay a little because HY bonds are more expensive to insure than IG. So when you take a short position in the credit default swap of investment grade bonds, right, you get money, but you get a small amount. When you take a long position or buy insurance on HY bonds, you have to pay a larger amount, right? So the spread is what you pay. But then what happens? HY bonds, the credit default swap spreads widen significantly. So your long position becomes very valuable. Your short position, you lose some money because the credit default swap of investment grade is also going up. But you make tons over here, you lose just a little over here. Okay, so on net, you make a lot on a very small investment, right? Because the difference between these two, when you got into the position, was before the COVID crisis hit. So you can see the bottom line is the credit default swap spread is an extremely important spread, right? I've given you several examples. First, during the housing crisis, right? With respect to Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, and Goldman Sachs, how you saw the credit default swap spread. Then we saw how the credit default swap spread changed during the sovereign debt crisis between German and Greece debt. And what was the appropriate trade at that point in time? And finally, we see how the credit default swap spread for investment grade versus high yield fund. In fact, there is an instrument where you can get a credit default swap spread on the IG rating. So it's a standardized portfolio of IG bonds versus HY bonds. Okay, again, it's an over-the-counter transaction. But there are ways institutional traders can execute that. So over here, we're talking about in the current environment, the credit default swap strategy to make money on this was a long position in high yield and a short position in investment grade. Okay, so we've seen 3 examples. Okay, so we'll pause over here, and next time we continue, we'll talk about a little more about how you use the plain vanilla swap from a speculative perspective. Notice all of our discussions are from a speculative perspective. Is that clear? So we spent a fair amount of time on credit, on all of these, but a lot of time on credit default swaps. But I want to spend a little more time on plain vanilla swaps. I've given you one example over here, right? But I'm going to, there's another example in the textbook that I'm going to expand on. Okay, let's pause over here.